Life Stories brings you tales that are both heart-wrenching and thought-provoking, reminding us of the power of empathy and the importance of acting on our instincts. In today's story, a simple act of kindness leads to an unexpected revelation, as a maid at a rundown motel uncovers a disturbing situation involving a mother and her young son. What follows is a journey of courage, compassion, and the will to protect. Stay with us as we dive into this emotional story of a child's silent cry for help. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to start today's journey. It was the kind of early morning that only the quietest of places could offer, soft streaks of light painting the sky with hues of pale pink and gold. The world was still half asleep, and the streets, bathed in mist, echoed with the faint whispers of a town just beginning to stir. I was there, standing at the end of a faded corridor in the Silver Oak Motel. My hands wrapped around the familiar handle of a mop. The hum of fluorescent lights above mingled with the occasional creak of the old building, reminding me that I had spent more mornings here than I could count. On autopilot, cleaning rooms, quietly moving through the forgotten halls. The Silver Oak Motel was a tired place, a relic from a time when it might have shone brighter. The neon sign flickered weakly in the pre-dawn gloom, and the playground outside, once alive with laughter, stood silent and rusted. The swings hung still in the cool breeze, and the slides, abandoned for years, were only memories now. Most days, it felt like the only visitors were those who had nowhere else to go, who simply passed through, leaving no mark but the brief echo of their footsteps. I had gotten used to the monotony. The walls, the peeling wallpaper, the scuffed floors, none of it surprised me anymore. But something felt different today. As I moved down the corridor, mop in hand, my thoughts were interrupted by a flicker of movement through the window. And I paused, leaning against the glass. I caught sight of a car pulling into the parking lot outside. The headlights sliced through the mist like a knife through fog, the engine cutting off with a soft thrum. Two figures emerged from the car, an older sedan, its paint faded with age. A woman, looking utterly exhausted, her movements jerky and uneasy, pulled a suitcase from the back seat. The boy with her, her son, I assumed, was barely awake, dressed in pajamas that looked far too small for him. His small hand clung to his mother's, and his eyes, heavy with sleep, struggled to stay open. It tugged at my heart seeing him like that. The boy yawned, rubbing his eyes with his free hand. I knew what it was like to be drained, to feel the weight of a sleepless night on your shoulders. And seeing the little boy so clearly exhausted stirred something deep within me. The mother seemed frantic, moving too quickly, too urgently. They needed a room, I realized, but they didn't belong here, not in a place like this. At least not at this hour. I put down the mop and made my way to the front desk, though I wasn't surprised to find that the regular receptionist hadn't arrived yet. The clock on the wall showed 6:30 a.m. It was early, too early for a typical check-in, but I had seen enough to know that this was just another one of those odd early morning arrivals. I'd handled them before. It was part of the job, part of this life in a place like the Silver Oak Motel. The woman and child entered the lobby, their footsteps slow, dragging along the old carpet. The boy's eyes were still heavy with sleep, and his mother looked like she hadn't rested in days. The harsh fluorescent lights above them cast dark shadows beneath their eyes. I smiled, a professional smile, though it felt like it required more effort than usual. "Good morning," I greeted softly, careful not to wake the child. "How can I help you today?" The woman approached the desk, her eyes darting nervously around the shabby lobby, as if she was waiting for something, someone. "We need a room," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, reaching for the ancient computer keyboard and entering the details. "That'll be $30 for the night, with a $20 deposit," I said as I counted out the crumpled bills she handed me. Her hands were shaking slightly, and I couldn't help but notice how tired she seemed. Her eyes held a kind of restlessness, a weariness that went beyond just needing sleep. The boy swayed slightly on his feet, his eyelids drooping as he fought to stay awake. Something about their appearance, their hurried actions, made me uneasy, but I pushed the feeling down, telling myself it was just my imagination. "You'll be in room 12, I said, handing the key over. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your room. We moved down the hallway in silence, the air thick with exhaustion. The boy's footsteps echoed in the corridor, slow and heavy, while his mother's were sharp, like she was in a hurry to leave but also afraid of being seen. I led them to the room, keeping my voice soft and my words brief as I gave them the usual rundown, about the phone, the water, checkout time. But even as I spoke, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in my chest. It felt as if something was off. The boy climbed into the bed, shoes still on, his small head sinking into the pillow. His mother barely acknowledged me as I finished my explanation. If you need anything else, please don't hesitate to ask, I said, but by then, she was already moving to unpack the suitcase. Barely registering my words, I left the room, the door clicking softly behind me, and walked back to the reception area. As I stood there, mop in hand, I couldn't stop thinking about the family. What was their story? Why had they come here, of all places? At this hour? I couldn't say for sure, but something told me I wasn't going to like the answer. I tried to shake off the feeling that something wasn't quite right as I resumed my work. But I couldn't. The scene replayed over and over in my mind, the boy's exhaustion, the woman's hurried movements, the way she almost seemed to avoid my gaze when I handed over the room key. It was just a gut feeling, a small whisper that kept pulling at me, telling me to stay alert. It wasn't long before I realized that I had forgotten to provide the mother and son with the TV remote and Wi-Fi information. Two things I kept behind the desk to prevent theft. It was a minor thing, really, but the thought of leaving them without it nagged at me. So, I grabbed the remote and the Wi-Fi details and made my way back to room 12. It wasn't a big deal, but something about the idea of leaving them to figure it out on their own didn't sit right with me. I knocked on the door, softly at first, not wanting to disturb the exhausted family. There was no response. I knocked again, louder this time, and called out, "Housekeeping, I have some items for you." After a moment, the door creaked open just enough for me to see the woman's face, her eyes narrowed, a mix of fatigue and irritation written on her features. "What?" she snapped, her voice harsh, barely above a whisper. I was taken aback, but I kept my composure. "I'm sorry to disturb you," I said, trying to keep my tone as calm and professional as possible. "But I forgot to give you the TV remote and Wi-Fi information earlier." The woman's eyes flickered, and then she reached out, snatching the items from my hand without a word. "Next time, leave them outside," she muttered, her voice thick with annoyance. "Don't disturb us again." With that, she slammed the door in my face, leaving me standing in the hallway, frozen for a moment. I had dealt with rude guests before, but something about this interaction felt different. The hostility in her tone, the way she didn't even seem to register the kindness behind my gesture, it all felt off. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened, but the nagging feeling in my chest only grew stronger. I couldn't shake the thought that something was wrong. Why had she been so agitated? Why had she reacted like that? It was as if I had crossed some invisible line by simply trying to help. I made my way back to the front desk, my mind racing with questions. But I didn't know what to do with them. In a place like this, strange things were more the rule than the exception. People checked in and out all the time. Some with stories they'd rather keep hidden. Some with secrets they didn't want anyone to know. And I wasn't in the business of asking questions. But this felt different. I couldn't help but wonder about the boy. About why he seemed so tired, so out of place. And the mother, her behavior, her frantic energy, it wasn't normal. I tried to push the thoughts aside as I grabbed the mop again, attempting to finish my cleaning duties. But even as I scrubbed the floor, my mind kept drifting back to room 12. The image of the boy, so small and fragile, haunted me. He had barely spoken, just clung to his mother's hand, looking up at her with those wide, tired eyes. And the mother, something about her made my skin crawl. It wasn't just exhaustion. There was something else there. Something darker. As I finished my rounds and moved down the hall to the next room, I glanced toward room 12 again. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. That there was more to this story than what I had seen. I kept telling myself it was just my overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it. There was a reason I felt this way. Something was happening in that room. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The day was moving slowly. The quiet hum of the motel pressing in on me as I continued to clean. But my mind was elsewhere, back in room 12. With the woman and the boy. The unease that had settled in me earlier hadn't dissipated, in fact. It had only grown stronger. I kept replaying the events over and over, the boy's tired eyes. His thin frame swaying on his feet. His mother's jittery movements. The harsh way she shut the door in my face. None of it added up. And the more I thought about it, the more I felt like something was terribly wrong. I tried to focus on my work, pushing aside the thoughts that kept resurfacing. But it was difficult. My eyes kept drifting back to room 12. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to do something, anything. It was almost as if the silence of the motel had taken on a weight. Pressing down on me, every little noise, every creak of the old building, seemed to magnify in the stillness. And the longer I stayed in this place, the more it felt like I was watching a slow-motion disaster unfold. One that I couldn't stop. It was around 7:30 a.m. when I noticed something strange. A small figure passed by the window outside, and as I looked up, I saw the woman and the boy heading toward the exit, moving quickly, almost as if they were running. The woman's movements were frantic, her face contorted with some emotion I couldn't quite place, fear, anger, maybe even desperation. She was holding the boy's hand so tightly it looked like she might be dragging him along. My heart skipped a beat as I watched them from behind the window. The boy was no longer in his pajamas. Instead, he was wearing just a thin tank top and a diaper. His small legs were exposed beneath the oversized shirt, and his feet were bare, scraping along the rough carpet. The mother seemed to be in a hurry, her gaze darting around the parking lot as if she expected someone to come after her. Something in my gut twisted. This wasn't right. There was no reason for a child to be dressed like that. And there was no reason for a mother to be acting so radically. My mind raced, my instincts screaming at me to do something. I couldn't let them leave like this. I had to stop them. But I wasn't sure how. The motel was quiet, almost eerily so, and I wasn't sure if anyone else had noticed the strange scene unfolding before me. I quickly abandoned my mop and rushed to intercept them at the front desk. My pulse quickened as I approached, and I struggled to keep my voice steady as I asked, "Excuse me, is everything all right? Are you checking out already?" The woman barely spared me a glance, her eyes wide and unfocused, as if she hadn't heard me at all. She muttered something under her breath, barely audible, and pushed past me, dragging the boy along. I could see the fear in his eyes now, real, raw fear. He swayed on his feet, looking up at his mother with an expression that made my heart ache. I watched helplessly as they climbed into the old sedan parked outside. The woman slamming the door shut behind her. The boy was unceremoniously shoved into the backseat, his tiny body barely fitting in the space. The car revved up and sped off, the tires screeching against the cracked pavement. I stood frozen, a sick feeling in my stomach, as I watched them disappear into the distance. What had just happened? The whole scene felt wrong. Deeply wrong. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Why had they left so suddenly? Why had the boy been dressed so inappropriately? And why had the mother seemed so frantic? So out of control? My heart hammered in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly off about the whole situation. I knew I couldn't just ignore it. I had to do something. But what? The police? Child Protective Services? But what if I was wrong? What if there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of this? I didn't have the answers. But I knew that I couldn't let it go. Not now. Not after everything I had seen. Something had to be done. But I wasn't sure where to start. The sense of dread that had been creeping up on me all morning had now fully settled in. And I knew I couldn't turn away from it. The sense of dread that had consumed me earlier hadn't abated. If anything, it had only grown more insistent, gnawing at me like a persistent ache I couldn't ignore. I watched the old sedan disappear down the street, the sound of the tires screeching in my ears long after the car was gone. I stood there, frozen for a moment, my heart racing as my mind spun in circles. The boy, Jake, his fearful eyes. The way his mother had treated him. It was all too unsettling to brush off. And now they were gone. Vanished into the early morning fog. And I was left with nothing but the feeling that I had missed something crucial. I didn't know what had happened to them. But I knew something wasn't right. The scene had been too strange. Too unnatural for me to ignore. The boy's exhaustion. The way he had looked at his mother. The way she had dragged him along so roughly. It all felt like a cry for help. But what could I do? I was just a maid in a rundown motel. I had no authority. No resources to help. The thought of involving the authorities, of calling the police, crossed my mind. But the fear of being wrong, of causing unnecessary trouble, kept me from acting. I didn't want to make things worse for them if they were just a family in distress. But deep down, I knew I couldn't let it go. I couldn't live with myself if something happened to that little boy. And I had done nothing. I stood there, torn between the instinct to protect and the fear of overstepping my bounds. The minutes stretched on, and I knew that every second counted. What if they were in danger? What if the mother was forcing the boy into something he didn't understand? My thoughts were a whirlwind. And before I could stop myself, I found myself heading back to room 12. I had no clear plan. Just a growing sense of urgency pushing me forward. I stood in front of the door for a moment. Listening. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. The door was locked. And I wondered if anyone was even inside. But I had to check. I needed to know. I fumbled with the cleaning key, trying to steady my shaking hands as I unlocked the door. I stepped inside cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The room looked exactly the same as it had earlier, dim. Unkempt, with the faint smell of cigarette smoke lingering in the air. But something was different now. There was a heaviness in the air. Something I couldn't quite place. I scanned the room quickly, looking for anything that might explain what had just happened. The bed was a mess. The sheets tangled and pulled aside as though someone had left in a hurry. The bathroom floor was damp, and a towel was crumpled in the corner. It all pointed to haste. To something happening too quickly for anyone to fully process. But it wasn't until I moved closer to the bed that I saw it, the objects hidden beneath the rumpled sheets. My stomach dropped as I saw the bent spoon, the blackened bottom, and the syringes scattered among the blankets. A chill ran down my spine, and I stepped back, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. The room, so seemingly innocent at first, was now a stark reminder of the dangers lurking beneath the surface. I stood frozen, my mind racing. Drugs. The mother had been using drugs. And it seemed likely that she had exposed her child to it. I wanted to do something. Anything. But I was paralyzed by the weight of what I had found. I wasn't a detective. I wasn't a social worker. I didn't know what to do with this information. But I knew it couldn't be ignored. I had to act fast before things got worse. I glanced toward the window. And for a moment, I thought I saw movement outside. My breath caught in my throat as I saw the old sedan pull back into the parking lot. Screeching to a halt, my heart skipped a beat. They were back. The woman, the boy, and someone else, another man. Perhaps? My instincts screamed at me to leave. To run. But I couldn't. Not now. Not after everything I had seen. As I stood there, watching the sedan return, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The woman and the boy emerged from the car. But this time, it wasn't just them. A man, someone I hadn't seen before, stepped out. His face set in a hard scowl. His eyes swept the parking lot. Suspicious. On edge. The boy looked terrified. His small shoulders hunched as if trying to shrink away from the man. I didn't need to see more. I knew I had to act. My heart was racing as I moved quickly, instinctively, toward them. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. The boy's fear, the tension in the air. It was too much to ignore. I approached the man and the woman, trying to keep my voice steady as I asked if everything was okay. The mother barely looked at me, but the man's eyes narrowed, warning me to back off. I offered to keep an eye on the boy, suggesting the playground. The mother hesitated for a moment but reluctantly agreed. I led the boy to the swings, my heart heavy with each step. He was quiet, withdrawn, but he followed me without resistance. I asked him his name, his age, and gently, he whispered back, Jake. I'm 5. When I asked him why he didn't want to go into the room, his answer sent a chill through me. It smells bad in there. My mind raced. The room, the syringes, the drugs. I had to do something. As I stood with Jake, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to protect him, no matter the cost. I knew that the moment I left him with that man, things could take a turn for the worse. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Life had shown me enough to understand that sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness could change everything. And right now, all I could do was give Jake a moment of safety. A moment where he could be free from fear. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more videos like this.